Welcome to the Talking Toughness series of podcasts, where we examine the mental toughness concept with guests from a wide range of sectors, illustrating that our mental approach to what happens to us and around us matters for all of us. Our guests come from the worlds of business and public service, education, social mobility, sport, and health. They all share their experiences and their observations about the factors that have enabled them to survive and to thrive on their journey through life. Many guests have gone further and incorporated the concept into what they do as coaches, trainers, managers, and leaders, helping others to thrive in their turn. Their experiences are valuable to those of us who strive to do the same.
Our guest today is Dan Abrahams, a leading sports psychologist with an impressive roster of elite clients that range from Aston Martin Formula One through England Rugby, England Golf, and many leading soccer clubs across Europe. In 2017, he opened the Dan Abrahams Soccer Academy, an online membership site for players, coaches, and parents to work together on the mental side of the game, hence today's topic. A former professional golfer, he understands the challenge of sport from both perspectives, player and coach. Dan is a practitioner with a phenomenal body of knowledge, skills and experience, who brings a thoughtful and considered approach to his thinking and to his work. Dan is a best-selling author who also hosts a podcast, The Sports Psych Show, which is now one of the world's most listened to sports psychology podcasts. Today, though, the boot is on the other foot as we welcome Dan as our guest today. This is a true opportunity to learn from a master of his craft. Well, welcome, Dan. It's a real pleasure to see you and to hear from you. And, we're really, really interested to hear what you're going to be able to tell us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really, really pleased to be here. Honoured, delighted, and all that jazz. So, Doug, John, great to have a conversation.
Yeah. Well, it's our honour in a sense, because we've been on your podcast and you're the master podcaster. And we're still beginners. We've been doing this for about 4 years, but I think we're still learning the ropes. The one thing that struck me...
This is like interviewing Joe Rogan about podcasts, this.
So the one thing that struck me on the podcasts we've done over the years, and we've had a huge range of people on our podcasts, is just how much we have learned from each podcast. Everybody comes on with their own set of experiences, their own perspectives, and sometimes some amazing insights. And so I'm interested to know, you've met and you've talked to some amazing people. What would you say are the things that have surprised you in your podcasts, and what have you learned from your podcasts?
Oh, wow. That's a big question to begin with, Doug. Thanks for that. And I feel now the pressure onto providing some insights in the next hour or so. So I'll try to do my best here. I would say that my podcast endeavor is a little bit of a selfish thing, in as much as I started it for myself first and foremost. That sounds absolutely terrible, I know, but by that I mean as a learning mechanism for me to dive back predominantly into academia, because I've mostly interviewed academics rather than practitioners, and mostly interviewed academics rather than coaches, although I have interviewed consultants and I have interviewed coaches. So it's really been a project since 2018 where I've tried to launch myself back into the world of academia and really understand some of the theories, the research base that's going on out there. So I suppose my answer to you is I'm constantly surprised, delighted, thrilled at what's going on out there. And I think probably the overarching answer here is, where I'm constantly surprised, is how, and take this the right way, John, because you're in academia, but how brilliant this research is and how frustrating it can be that so much of this great stuff doesn't see the light of day, because there's so many golden nuggets, if you like, packed into these research papers that for somebody like me as a sports psychology consultant can use at the coalface, but equally so many coaches can use. And I think the continued challenge for the world of academia and sports psychology academia, because I'm a sports psychologist, right? Is to try to find as many platforms. I mean, I appreciate researchers and academics have to write in a particular style. That's the landscape. That's just the way it is. But we need to continue to find as many platforms that takes that writing style or takes that information and disseminates it in a manner that can help coaches to utilize it, can help coaches to draw on that research. And obviously that's what we try to do at the Sports Psych show, whether it's your great work on mental toughness, which I know you disseminate anyway in easy to understand language, but there's just so many topic areas. So I think I am just every single week getting to talk to academics in the world of sports psychology, just constantly surprised, delighted, and amazed how much great content is out there, and I'm just constantly striving to bring that alive and to make it as accessible for as many people as possible.
Well, that's perfectly aligned with our purpose. I mean, when we set out, it was also a selfish reason, but that's because we know we've got a great idea. This mental toughness concept, and not enough people know about it. So this became a vehicle for telling the world about it. And it seems to be working. It seems to be the most effective way of promoting it. People do listen to it. I'm really quite surprised, and people get something from it. So I kind of get that.
Yeah.
I have a question for you there. Sorry, cutting already. This is why I'll never want a podcast avoid. Talk over your guests. So, but I'll carry on anyway. But one of the things I think you do this so well, Dan, and look, anyone that's read any of Dan's books or followed LinkedIn or anything like that, available in all good, places of resource. You're very, very, very good at distilling things down from kind of this complex, nuanced theoretical base to something where you don't have to be academic, you don't have to be a psychologist, you might be a football coach, for example. So you talk about, what does confidence look like on a football pitch, something like that. I think that's such an important point, because it's something that academics either generally aren't that good at or don't have the time to put into it. What is it that you're trying to achieve? How do you get that thought process of taking something that's complicated, distilling it to something that's digestible and understandable, but without just making it kind of nonsense and, what colour are you and all that kind of crap?
It's a really good question, because I think for the 18 years I've been a registered and qualified sports psychologist, I've been enveloped in paranoia that I've not been evidence-based, or because, I don't work at a university. I've done a little bit of lecturing in the past, and I come from a playing background, professional golf, and then a coaching background, a PGA golf coach. And then I as I was doing that, I did my degree in psychology, which was successful. I got a first class honours, and then I went into my masters, and as I was doing my masters, which I really, really enjoyed at Brunel, at the same time I was so immersed in my coaching. And I'm saying all of this because I very much came from a world of the practical, and also, if I was to be 100% honest, reading books that could be considered a little bit more pop psychological and building from there. Although great influences included people like Dr. Bob Rotella, who's very much from a mainstream sports psychology background with his books, for example, Golf is Not a Game of Perfect, which I think is arguably the most influential sports psychology book ever at the moment, and he wrote these books in a manner that really brought the subject matter alive, and he did so kind of not. In his books, he didn't really reference any psychological theory as such or research, although in some of his latter books, he's been a little bit more that way. But I've always been mindful of, people use these terms like pracademics and stuff like that. And I've always been mindful of, I don't want to get too outlandish or too pop psychological, or just saying anything, and I think it's a big problem in the world of Western sport that, I think that, the memes that you see on social media and, you can control your attitude, effort and energy. And it's all about, the grind and stuff like that. And obviously there's so much
that take no talent,
Yeah, things. Yeah, I mean, I post about that one all the time, which, I go back and forward with that in terms of his, the thing you're referring to there is a poster that says 10 things that need no talent, and it's body language and turning up on time and all that jazz. And, on the one hand, you can dive into the science of personality and the personality literature and go, okay, talent is an interesting word here, but there's definitely a biopsychosocial quality to these aspects that feel a little bit out of your control and might be biologically informed or genetically informed. At the same time, the research out there on belief about belief and aspects of personality psychology that demonstrate how you perceive the world is gonna influence how you act in the world. And so actually, if you do believe that these things take no talent, maybe that's useful for you. So my kind of brain goes back and forth on that one. We can have a further conversation about that if you want, but there is a lot of pseudo intellectual stuff, pseudo psychological stuff and pop psychological stuff. So my long answer to you coming backwards here is, I've always been really mindful of still trying to be evidence informed and not too outlandish with my writing. At the same time, I love to sit down and write about stuff that inspires me and gets me excited. And that's how I've always seen it. I'm writing my next book at the moment. And I think to answer your question as accurately as I can, when I'm writing, I imagine, this is literally true what I'm about to say, I imagine athletes on the team bus reading the book, and I want them to be engrossed in the book. I believe it's got to have a rhythm to it. I believe it's got to have structure to it. I think it's got to unpack things in a language that doesn't abuse the psychological theory or the research out there, but helps people to understand it. And that's why over the years, for example, when I talk about self-regulation techniques, I talk about using controllers. Why do I do that? Because as a bit of fun, when I started working football, I was like, well, how can I help footballers understand self-regulation in a kind of a nimble, dynamic, quick, fun manner? And I realized pretty quickly that footballers, broad brush statement here, but go with it. And I don't mean any harm by saying this, go in and train, have lunch, go home and play on a PlayStation for 4 hours in the afternoon. Well, what have they got in their hand every single day? A controller. What are you doing when you walk out onto the pitch? You want to take control, take charge. You can use a controller. I'm talking about a self-taught controller or a body controller, using your body as a weapon. Individual zone of optimal functioning. I love that research literature from Yuri Hanin. How can I bring that alive? Well, I might call it a game face. Yeah. Achievement goal theory. How can I bring that alive? I call it a match script. Picking specific controllable positive tasks. So I like to think, hopefully I don't abuse the theory. I'm sure there's some really hardcore academics who would go, wow, that doesn't fit, and you've enveloped that into there, and you've tried to shoehorn this into there. But ultimately, sometimes I do think, last thing here, I do think you have to accept that you're going to abuse a couple of things for the point of bringing it alive, because ultimately you want players to be able to take these and run with them. So I am trying to picture people reading the books and staying gripped with it, rather than being not. let's go with this, bored by it. But athletes are athletes. They want something that's inspiring. They want something practical. They want something to utilize. So that's what I've always tried to do, John.
Yeah, and you do it not just blowing smoke up your ass, but you do it very well. And I could talk all day and say, "Oh, talk to us about performance mindset and things like that." And there's what people can find that stuff. It's great. But I just sort of continue on that process. I remember when I was doing like training in sports like about 15 years ago, Brian Hemmings, certainly sports sites in Britain, everyone will know Brian Hemmings is. I remember him saying, you need to do psychology without it feeling like psychology. And I've kind of always kept that in my mind. And I think one of the things I remember, like when you're training, and this is true whether it's sport or any kind of psycho or executive coaching or whatever, but like you go in with this, I need to be evidence informed, and then you realize how inflexible, you're going, right, here's framework I'm working around, and you almost don't trust yourself to go outside of that or to sort of reframe it or I suppose, translate it. And then I kind of come around to the point of thinking, when you become more experienced, as long as you kind of keep up to date and you keep reading and talk to clever people, like there has to be a point where you might just say something off the top of your head. But after years of experience and loads of training, that is evidence informed, because you wouldn't have thought of that if you weren't informed by evidence. And this is where, like, sometimes in the health service, it's come up against, I think things can be, I'd like a little bit more flexible. Everything ends up just being CBT. And that's not to criticize CBT, but it's so rigid. And kind of people don't trust themselves often to go, I'm informed, therefore, if I just think of something to say reactionary in a conversation, that is informed because I'm thinking of it. My brain has spent the last decade or two surrounded by this. And how much, so I suppose I'll phrase it as a question, so it's not just, geez, I'll turn into this that says Dan Abrahams and just listen to John talking. But when you're working with a team, for example, or players or coaches, how much of the conversations you have, I know what I'm gonna do, I know what's gonna come out of my mouth and have this, versus we have a chat, walk around the pitch and talk and see what happens?
Great question. The vast majority, a session for me goes off in often, not always, but often goes off in so many different directions. And to speak to your point about choice of framework, I use it, you might call it a mixed methods approach, if you like, it mixed modalities. 1 minute I'm kind of, the more experienced you are, the more you can, the nimbler you can be, the more you can sum up what you know about each framework. So as ghastly as it might sound to a purist, I might be having a conversation with somebody and thinking, this is an opportunity to use a solution-focused brief therapy tool. And then a few minutes later, you might be thinking, no, I need to do some CBT work here. I think I always remember, what resonated with me? I always remember once Roy Hodgson, the former Fulham, Liverpool, Crystal Palace and England head coach, right? Very famous man, saying that he would introduce tactical work to his players in the guise of various games where it didn't feel like tactical work, right? They didn't realize they were necessarily doing tactical work, but they were. I don't know what that looks like, but go with that. And I kind of feel I do the same with my approach to my consultancy. I don't ever sit down with a client and go, right, we are going to take an acceptance, commitment, therapeutic approach here, and I'm going to take you step by step what this looks like. And maybe that's to my detriment from time to time, because maybe that's what somebody needs. But I tend to hide an ACT approach, or conversely, an REBT approach or a CBT approach, or utilizing SFBT or motivational interviewing. I tend to hide it amongst, within the conversation. So that's how I go about it. And so it tends to dart all over the place a little bit, depending on who is in front of me. I think context is everything. And I think that is who, what, how, why. Who is it that I'm speaking with? What is it that they need, or what is it that they want? How am I going to do that? And why am I doing it in this way? And obviously the why becomes the reflection piece afterwards. And so I would say that I think, although I do have at the same time my typical approach around mental skills, because so much of my work, whilst it wouldn't be considered what I do as traditional MST, mental skills training, I do a lot of performance psychology, again, coming back to squashing ants, using a game face, having a script, and so on and so forth. That isn't to suggest that I don't do other more counseling oriented forms of consultancy, but I do a lot of mental skills work. So often going into a session, I'll be thinking, these are the tools and techniques I'll probably be introducing. But it just depends what that person brings to the table and the conversation they want to have. So I think that's one question. So it is a mesh of things, and it is a mesh of experiences that you just don't know which direction you're going to go and what you're going to draw upon and how you're going to do it. I think the other side of that question, to come back to this idea of evidence-based or evidence grounded or evidence informed, whichever term you want to use, is I think it's a key mix of three, in as much as to speak to what you've said. I love what you said there, John, about how ultimately your experience means that at some stage you've got to trust that what you're going to say might not have a direct relationship with some form of research evidence, but it's based on things that you've heard, courses you've done, qualifications you've achieved, etc., etc. So for me, evidence informed really comes from, I've got a great image from the Royal College of Teachers, who really split it in three, and that's the combination of research, so empirical evidence, if you like, experiences from best practice, combined with context. Who is in front of you, and what's the situation here? It's the combination of all three, and that is an art as much as it is a science. You could argue it's the meeting of the two, and it's a craft. So I think it's very much a scientific and a human endeavor.
That's really interesting. So I'm just listening to you, and I'm pulling together several ideas in my head. Royal College of Teaching, you're writing a book that's, and you're doing it in a way that you imagine it's, they're reading it, they're engrossed in it.
I hope so.
You're coming across as an educator, and I think that's what we do as well in our work. And when you talk about context, I wonder if there's a difference between the sports world and the world that I operate in. Because most of my time, I work with coaches, trainers who have already got some ideas in their head. And I often find I have to unlearn somebody to enable that idea, our ideas to enter that. So I'll give you a simple example. Everybody knows about growth mindset. And we sit down with people and say, well, actually, what is growth mindset? And they kind of come out with a very high level description. We say, well, there's actually a lot more detail. There's something called the 4 C's that explains growth mindset in a lot more detail, more useful detail. And you can get people to that level. And then you say, well, actually, thanks to the work of clever people like Perry, we now know there are 8 components to the 4 C's. And we find we can't sort of throw it all at people all in one go. in the education process, we're kind of building and building. And then we kind of get to a potentially confusing point where we say, well, yeah, all the 8 components of mental toughness, they generally provide a benefit, but not always. And so, John's been doing some work that demonstrates that achievement orientation correlates negatively with curiosity. And we can explain that. And we find in the process of education, we're taking people through a process. Do you find that in your world?
Yeah, which you were speaking there. I love what you said there, Doug, and I love your shout out to your colleague as well, Dr. Perry there.
I have to quote my references.
Yeah, of course. That's the ethical way to do it. As you're speaking, the phrase that came into mind, if I understood you accurately, is meet people where they're at.
Yes.
That I think that is really, really important, and I think the challenge is what can we introduce to those people, especially when you've got a room. I mean, for you, it must be a real challenge. You've got a room full of coaches from all domains, from all worlds, educators, and you're going to have people with different beliefs, lenses, qualifications, viewpoints, and so on and so forth, and different wants and needs for them being in the room and working with different populations. So that's I would almost say you've got the impossible task there to get that 100% right all the time, to hit the sweet spot with every single individual in the room all the time. So I think you have to forgive yourself for that. At the same time, I'm sure as an experienced and nimble educator that you are, Doug, you're obviously trying to introduce your work in a manner that's going to be as individual specific as possible, whilst tailoring it to the group. And that's very, very that bears a lot of relationship with coaching in the world of team sports, doesn't it? Because you've got in the world of football now, you've got a 25 strong squad, and you're going to have 25 people who are at different ages, different cultures, different backgrounds, different beliefs, different wants, different needs, and so on and so forth. So many different things, and that's an enormous challenge, and it makes me think of the importance. And maybe it's tough for you to do this on a 1 or 2 day course, but in the world of sports, maybe you have a bit more of a luxury to be able to train your team and yet set individual development plans within the team setting. And that's where you can best meet people where they're at. So I almost wonder if your landscape there is far more difficult and complicated. That isn't to suggest it's not difficult and complicated for a coach of team sports, but you've got sort of 1 or 2 days to find the appropriate training process for the individuals in the room, as well as introducing all of your concepts and constructs. But ultimately, what are we trying to do? If we want to help somebody have a great experience under our educational watch, then we've got to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, and so I've really picked up your observation about engaging with the person so that they're actually thrilled and excited by it. Because if you can get that first step and they're saying, wow, I've learned something, you can then get them onto the second step and then the third step. And, one of the complications with our work is the mental toughness concept. There's over 40,000 combinations of profile. You can't cover that. So we say, in a 2-day program, we'll tell you how to look at those profiles. I can't tell you which profiles you'll come across next week. You're going to have to be nimble about that.
Yeah, it's a bit of two things to say here, isn't there? Listening to you, I feel that education process is a bit of a dance. It's trying to meet them where they're at. So it's by dance, I mean it's respecting your dance partner and getting the feel for how they're dancing, and also so tuning into that and dancing with in the same rhythm and tempo as them. whilst wanting to do it in your own style, essentially. You've got all this information that you want to deliver to this person that you're passionate about, that you know a lot about, and you know is going to be really helpful for this person. Yet at the same time, as I said, you've got to meet their rhythm, their tempo, their style of dancing, essentially. And so there's, I think that's a really, really important thing.
Well, I think I love your metaphor, your dancing metaphor. I think you've given us the strap line for the podcast.